morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Robin Ayub. I'm the founder and the host of the Localization Fireside Chat. So, welcome to another episode. Welcome to another interesting conversation. And today, my guest is Rodrigo Corradi. And Rodrigo, welcome to the channel.
Thank you.
And Rodrigo is a well-known name in the localization industry. Rodrigo spent about 25 years in the localization industry, specializing in machine translation technology, human processes and capabilities, and also now he supports LSPs in their journey for language technology and accomplishing their successful goals in the space, in the industry. Welcome to the channel one more time, Rodrigo. I appreciate you taking the time. And how is Valencia this time of year? I know you're in Spain, you're in Valencia. Are everybody on the channel interested to know where people are when I talk to them? So the floor is yours.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, Valencia's getting warm, so I've got the air conditioning on for the first time today.
This time of year?
This time of year, it's starting already. So, and Valencia is kind of, it's a very interesting place, a very cosmopolitan, and it's going to be the venue for Gala in about 2 weeks' time. So I've got a lot of
There's
folks.
a lot of excitement around that.
Absolutely. And I joined Lock Lunch. So I've been doing the Lock Lunches here in Valencia. We set up 2 months ago. Found that we had a really, really interesting and very interesting community of linguists and associated sort of language lovers from universities, schools. And interesting enough, that they'd not really heard about a number of things that we've talked about. What they had heard about was AI, sure. So that's been like a big focus of our Lock Lunches in many ways. But Valencia is a great place. Obviously, the weather is wonderful, and there's a lot of investment in Valencia. So I think you're going to hear more about Valencia as a city, as a place to live in the coming years. For me, it was a bit of a lucky dip when I left Chile, but absolutely great place to start.
I tell you, my family and I spent some time last October in Spain, and we really enjoy the country, we enjoy visiting. And even my wife, she enjoys it so much, like going to Spain, that now she's convinced me to move to Spain. I don't know, if we can afford to move to Spain nowadays or not. I have no idea, but it's on the books. I have no clue when it's going to happen.
Wow.
So in any case, thank you so much for joining me this morning. I really appreciate your time, and excited to know a little bit more about yourself. So the audience, tell us a little bit about your journey, Rodrigo. Everybody in this channel, we tell them, and everybody's interesting stories. They to say, how did the journey start? How did they become involved in the localization industry? And everybody's got their own unique way of finding their way into the localization industry. I'm very excited and very interested to find out your story. Tell us your story if you don't mind.
Not at all. It's, I think like many of us, it's slightly accidental. I wouldn't say it was a purposeful decision to kind of join the localization industry. What I think is purposeful is the fact that I've stayed in the industry. Like a lot of my colleagues and associates within the industry, once you're into it, you really get into it. It's very difficult to leave because at the heart of it, I think, is language. It's the way we communicate in all its forms. And I think once you start to get into the idea that you're actually enabling something that's actually fundamental to the human race, you kind of buy into it, especially as a translator or a project manager. The conversations and the outcomes that you're having are literally global. And then I think a number of things happened to me. I mean, I started working as a project manager, really in the commercial arm. At some point, I saw a job ad within the company to do machine translation. At that time, it was rules-based machine translation. It was very, by today's standards, very clumsy. And many people really didn't necessarily have much belief in it. So it was something that most people would laugh and sneer about. Then we got statistical machine translation. Then we got neural machine translation. And now we're in a completely kind of AI paradigm, which incidentally is like 70 years pretty much to the year, right? So in 1954, you've got sort of, AI starting in terms of, sort of Georgetown experiments. And now we're 70 years on, we're suddenly seeing like AI research, and linguists and language lovers and language experts are now at the forefront of something really global again. And I think, it was a good decision to stay on. So that's kind of my journey, but it was definitely accidental at the beginning. What I studied at university, for instance, was literature. What I like about literature is the plot. I like the structure. I like the interconnection between things. I like the fact that there's a narrative. Um, and somehow all of that seemed to fall into place when I started to work as a kind of AI strategist or consultant. It's putting
Hmm.
things together. It's working out where things fit. It's working out, the connection between the things, and then
Hmm.
kind of like somehow articulating that um, into a process and an offering. And people, um, that's pretty much backed up by a lot of people. When you work in localization, you're working with engineers, DTPers, translators. There's
Hmm.
a whole host of characters in this plot.
Absolutely. And funny you mentioned like you came to the industry by accident. And I've this is our episode number 61. So I've talked to many people on this channel, and I was able to put them in two categories in terms of how they managed to get into the business or to the industry, in two categories. One is accidental, and the other one is on purpose. Until two episodes previous to this one, somebody says, "What about accidentally on purpose?" So it's all, and you validated quite a bit. Now quite a number of people in our industry, they came to the industry in an accidental manner, and they found it intriguing, they found it exciting, they found it fulfills their their challenge desire to challenge themselves and try to always explore brand new things or brand new ways. And they stuck around, they made a business out of it, they made a career out of it. And very timely now to be speaking to you on on in this day and age where we are going through a huge transformation in our industry on a variety of things. I want to talk to you about a variety of things when it comes to AI, but one of the things that pops to my mind as I continuously discuss AI on a day-to-day basis with various people is that, and I like your opinion on this, are we at a point where we have a gap between what the technology is doing and capable of doing, and what are we understanding technology can do and what is capable of doing? Is there, or are we on the same level as an industry? Are we understanding this capability, where it can take us, or are we getting there but we're not there yet, and we still believe that is just another, you mentioned earlier, there's just another technology, it will come, it will go, and there's a new technology that will come in.
Yeah.
What's your read on this?
My read on it is there is a gap. I mean, I think LSPs have been particularly quick at making sure and reassuring their customers that they can take on board this new paradigm. The reality is that it will take a bit more time. As you scratch underneath the surface, there's probably a lot of work to do. So one of the key areas that I've kind of worked in, especially in the last 5 to 6 years, is a skills gap. It's like essentially, we want to offer these solutions, but we need to be underpinned by, human talent. And I think that we're at the point now where we can see a lot of possibilities, but there are going to be new offerings, and all those new offerings need to be underpinned by, real capabilities. And at the moment, I think we're working that out. With those capabilities, you have to establish best practices, you have to have standards. Customers need to really understand what they're getting when they get involved. So I think there's a misalignment. But when you think about it, there is always going to be a misalignment. Technology comes in, and then you need the kind of creative powers in order to think out how we're going to use this, how we're going to commercialize and monetize this. And if you look at the localization industry, it's a relatively, I guess, young industry in many ways. I mean, it's been around since like probably the 1990s. It's probably CAT tools that emerged mid 80s. Then you get TMSs, then you get MT. You get MT 70 years ago, but you get MT kind of in our century, and then you get large language models. Every time these steps have been incorporated, not just on a technology level and integration level, but also when it comes to kind of human talent underpin it and actually, contributing to the actual success of it. So I think we have to be confident that actually there's something in the localization industry that has always been regenerating. It's almost sleptwalked into the AI paradigm, and it has a huge number of virtues that I think is probably one of the reasons it's actually quite an interesting paradigm for other industries to look at, especially that integration between human and technology.
And if you take a scan across our industry, Rodrigo, you characterize the industry very well. The profession itself has been around like for thousands of years. Thousands of years ago, people needed people to translate for, right? And the technology aspect of it, you're absolutely correct. It started like in the 90s. You're relatively young on the tools, and the need for tools came in around that whole internet that drove connectivity, and people are in different parts of the world, wants to know what's going on in different parts of the world, or wants to communicate. Therefore, you have a lot more content now, and the human mind, or the human capabilities, resources, etc., don't have enough of them to translate the amount of content that's coming at us. So it drove innovation. It drove, I need tools. I need calculators to an accountant, basically, so I can do the math quickly. I can translate quickly. So I got to get more technological advancement in this. So because of our industry and the age of the industry, I feel like from a resource perspective, we have an aging resources in our industry that is ready to exit the business. We've got very few resources that are coming in, and I'm taking a scan across the globe entire. How many linguistic degrees are people coming out with, and either they stick in the industry or they don't stick in the industry. That's irrelevant, but very few number of graduates coming out of university saying, "I want to become a translator." So that transformation from a technological perspective, given the demographic of our resources, some people are going to be acceptant of this. Some people, because they're young, they're used to technology, they're used to handling technology. Some people probably won't be able to handle it. What's your advice on this scenario that we have?
There's a couple of interesting things. One which I definitely wanted to touch upon, which I think is kind of leadership. We've had a huge, very significant leadership over the last 25 years or so, and there is a leadership that's now, as you say, exiting, and that needs to be replaced. And I think the one thing that, as you say rightly, translation has been around for a long time, but translation is a task to some degree, and localization has taken that task and that profession and turned it into something which is industrial, yeah, and so something that's commercial. So there has been a lot of what I would say is creative insight into how to take tools and talent and kind of say, well, okay, we can have an offering, we can monetize this. And I think that there'll be a new generation which come up with probably see large language models, see Gen I, and say, actually, there's now another way in which we can monetize this, or we can become useful to the global economy. It's because of the skill sets. I mean, very thorough skill sets that we have. Translation requires a lot of tools. Essentially, if you scratch underneath the offerings, you get human talent, and human talent is gathering data, harvesting data through TMSs and CAT tools. They're channeling data. They're creating sequences of the best data to use in form of TMs. All of this is going to be absolutely valuable going forward in terms of labeling. Then there's a whole part where we've been building, AI models. So you look at AI models, they need to be built, they need to be tested, they need to be troubleshooted. You need traceable types of AI, so there's governance around it. It's a repurposing of skill sets that's really required. And I think that when you start to not think of it just as translation and machine translation as a replacement of it, you start looking at skill sets, actually it's very exciting, because not all industries have that kind of cognitive and critical thinking in their processes. And we've had that for a very long time. Probably 3 or 4 technologies come along, they come in, they get introduced into the process, and we move forward. And that's quite a lot for 2 or 3 generations.
So, the talent piece, there's a couple of school of thoughts in here, generally speaking, in the industry. One that would say, we need to repurpose, retool, reskill these individuals, as you mentioned earlier. And, the existential question that always comes up. Is this the end of the localization industry? It doesn't matter. Like, if we're trying to reskill, retool right now, is like a stopgap measure to slow or the inevitable, or which is technology taking over our profession, our industry, or we'll be forever in a hybrid mode, human and technology coexisting?
I think it's likely to be the latter. I think that we have in localization, and I might be wrong on this, but I do believe that we've built up huge amounts of trust in the relationships we have with large global organizations. We have, in many ways, been able to proactively and seamlessly go and make sure that the content barrier, the language barrier, is not an issue, and that was done very proactively. And I think that as an industry, those skill sets, that kind of vision has always been there. So I think that as you move to a different paradigm, you still got to think about, is an industry got the talent? Do they have the kind of energy about them to go and do the new tasks that need to be done? So I don't think localization will be potentially recognizable as it was, maybe, 10 or 15 years ago. But if you go back another 20 years, it wasn't recognizable again. It's definitely going to have to transform. It will definitely need to have new offerings. There will be AI, there's going to be more technology. Humans will be targeted towards the areas where they're needed most. But all of that is, I guess, the question that quite often I've posed to a number of my colleagues. It's like, who's taking care of that repurposing? So we have to look at where we are today. We have to look at the offerings and the capabilities we have and how we, I guess, provide services to other companies, and try to kind of envisage or anticipate where they're going to be, their roadmaps in 5 years' time, and start to align with that. And we need to look at what that gap is. We need to look at how much that gap is, and we need to possibly think outside of our own organizations to go and do that repurposing. One of the key things are universities. Universities probably have already been trying to close the gap with technology, introducing maybe from translation studies to translation industry studies, where they're using much more CAT tools, much more AI. And probably we're going to need the help of some of the institutes that regulate translation. I mean, you have to be a translator, sometimes you need to be certified, etc. And so maybe there's going to have to be new offerings that are somehow validated and certified in order to have standards. And I think all of that movement, those partnerships with universities and institutes, will just give us a bigger voice and a more credible voice. But it's definitely going to be some work, because we've been very self-reliant for a number of years. We may need to reach out and have cross alliances with others in order to survive in the way, and we are going to survive, but we're going to survive in the way which we find more beneficial.
There are, you bring a very good question, topic, because I've been thinking about this for a while. And actually, yesterday I was having a conversation about it. Is that every time I turn around, I hear there's so many quality standards being thrown around, specifically on the ISO side of things. So, and those standards are aimed to control quality within the process that you have from a localization perspective. And a lot of companies, they put that on their website, they advertise it everywhere in their marketing material, etc. Nothing wrong with that. You want to make sure that you have a quality process that is validated. But with the advancement of technology, I feel like there's a bit of a disconnect. Like, you've got AI doing its thing on the side here, and changing the world as we know it, and the standards are not really catching up to it. So there's another gap to be identified. And if I know anything about standards, it takes a long time to put a standard together. You got to get your committees to agree, technical committees, etc., to agree on what we want to do and how we're going to do it. And there's a catch-up game here.
Absolutely, there's a catch-up game all over, and I think that's kind of what, in many ways, when we have these discussions, whether yourself and your colleagues, or I have my discussions with everybody else, I'm constantly telling people, what, the gap is huge. It's much bigger than we believe, and therefore it's incumbent on everybody to start to have that conversation. And one of the things is, in organizations, and large organizations such as LSPs, and some are huge, they need to start to have an auditing. They need to have a company discourse around it. They need to have a discussion around where they're going, and be transparent. In that transparency, they're going to find some of the answers. But every part of the localization community, and obviously elsewhere outside the localization community, needs to have that discussion around where we're going and what we're going to need. And I guess, to your point, where you're saying, for instance, around standards, I mean, recently here in Europe, we had the EU AI Act. There are more AI acts following across the globe. Some of these are really perhaps geared towards privacy and data, and really the relationships between some of the large, organizations such as the EU and the kind of huge AI companies. But beyond that, there's going to have to be a discussion about how it gets deployed. And it's in the deployment. So I think that from our perspective, from localization perspective, what you're looking at is, we may not be front and center of some of those discussions. I mean, there'll be large organizations that go to the large consulting houses, and they will talk about strategy, etc. But our place at the table will definitely come when it comes to deployment. for all the things that we said already in this conversation, we're very, very good at process. We're very good at implementing technology and getting humans to work with the technology. We've had a huge amount of practice in that. So I think when it comes to large language models, enterprise level, when a company wants to start to build their own large language model that replicates their values and their information to their employees, there's a huge amount in which the localization companies can contribute to that process, to that onboarding, to that deployment. Deployment is really what we do in that respect. So I think all those things will emerge over time, all those standards, the best practices. But I think we're quite good at best practices, so we're definitely going to help out there. But there's probably a larger conversation, in other institutions and governments that it's probably going to have to take place first. At the moment, it does feel a little bit, dare I say it, like the Wild West when it comes to kind of, trying to have AI governance. I think people really don't quite have all the tools at their disposal to say that they have that yet. And that's a problem that we're going to have to solve over the next few years.
No, we spoke a little bit about a human involvement in the technology, and as a trainer at this point, I'm assuming that we're all becoming more of a large living lab for for the technology data centers, which is run AI based. So the question, this came out yesterday or a couple of days ago, I can't remember when. Just recently came out that Google Translate stopped to take human input. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. If it's brand new to you, I'll let you take a look at it. But one of the things that it's rattling through my brain, if are we saying, or Google saying, not me, that we've reached a maturity level in our technology that we don't need human. That's assumption number one, and assumption number two. I guess I run a podcast. I'm allowed to assume a little bit. So the assumption number two would be saying, you know what? You guys are driving me crazy with all your input. We got to draw the line somewhere, and good is good enough. Let's move on.
I mean, it could be. I mean, I'm not familiar with that, but essentially that we have an issue, I guess, with trying to disambiguate what is good data and what data could corrupt our system. So at some point, I think that there probably needs to be a pause, and it needs to be a calibration what's being harvested, in order just to make sure that they can move forward with some level of confidence in the outputs that the large language models get. We're all very familiar with the LLMs hallucinating, and so I think that in itself is a problem, because people are going to feel worried or mistrustful. And I think we need to get to a level like we got to a level in the industry when it came to machine translation. We had to sometimes pause. Quite often, we released languages in a very phased way. So we knew that some models were better than others. Some models were better on some languages and some content. And it was very,
I was going to ask you that, yeah.
It was introduced very methodically. And quite often, we saw that there was probably, I think, a consensus, that languages such as the Figs and some of the Scandinavians were okay for a while on certain content. And then we built out. And not every community of linguists was the same as well. We had to be more sensitive to some communities where the MT wasn't quite as good. So it clearly doesn't happen all at once. And I think that just the strategy around doing that progressively probably helped the fact that machine translation already had probably a difficult reputation. If we'd released everything all at once, it would have just worsened the situation. So a pause was needed. And that pause probably took place somewhere between SMT and NMT. By the time NMT came around, I think we'd gained confidence and traction. But it didn't happen, like overnight for everybody. There were some people that really had to play catch up towards the end.
That's right. And interesting, you bring a good point, which I wanted to ask you, is like, not all AI solutions are created equal, specifically when it comes to languages. And, I've always been saying this, not all MT engines are created equal. Some of them are good at certain things versus other things. So where does this whole idea, and I know it's a policy thing. I know I think I know what the answer is going to be on this one. Where does the data security sit within all this? There's a lot of conversations around data security in Europe, in North America, in Asia, everywhere. Everybody wants to protect their own data, and the data needs to, stay within whatever paradigm they define, be it geographical or non-geographical entities or virtual entities. How's the European Union, since you are in Europe? So how's the European Union? I know they've got a bunch of policies on data security and data protection. But how are they dealing with this entire AI discussion when it comes to data security?
With a lot of caution. I think that the key here has been to, there's a lot of, maybe a year and a half ago when this all came out, there was a lot of customers that people were working with, we were working with, that said, absolutely, our data needs to be protected. Do not use our data for anything at all. In fact, if there's any idea, we need to be, consulted completely. So there
Mm-hmm.
were red lines drawn up pretty quickly by customers straight away. And I
Yes.
think essentially that was the start of the caution we've had. Now that's always been, I think, part and parcel of what localization has done with data. We've had TM data, and we've always been very careful with that,
Mm-hmm.
ensuring that translation memories were always client specific, etc. So I think that in terms of security, that's going to continue. I can't imagine that can change very much. But in terms of like what I would say in terms of going forward, um, it's getting to the point where I think that there may be potential for, we've seen this not many times, but some companies will get together and say, actually,
Yeah.
we don't mind sharing if it's for the greater good. This collaboration may take place because I think that in the end, what we're going to see with AI is that it becomes pretty ubiquitous, and it's going to be just part of the fabric that that we work with. And as it gets more competitive, people will have to kind of figure out, what, how they're going to power their large language models. Not every, you were saying, there's not everything is equal. Well, not everyone has equal amounts of data. It was one of the issues that we had
True.
when we were creating machine translation, that some companies would come to us and they didn't have enough data or TM to actually create a model, and so we
Mm.
had to find ways in order to help them create data, create
Yeah.
TMs, and that might be another huge, offering that perhaps localization industry can help with. So, not all data is equal, not all content is equal as well. So I
True.
think we're definitely going to be, at the moment, everyone is very, very, concerned about it. But as we go forward, maybe there'll be more pragmatism.
So, Rodrigo, like based on your expertise and the and I know you're involved in many in many situation where you consult on this stuff. Have you run across a situation where the solution required to be on premises, meaning on site? So, if I was looking for a an AI solution, I don't want to go to the cloud where everybody else is,
Mm.
mishmashed all their data together. I want to have my own solution. Have you been involved in this, and there's a pros and cons to that, or what's
Yeah,
your opinion?
I mean, we definitely have we've had in the past where I've worked, we definitely have lots of on-premise solutions. I think a lot of them are because of government and financial institutions. It brings about its own benefits quite clearly in terms of, the regulation which they work under. And it also brings some challenges because, quite a lot of these, and actually opportunities. So for instance, what I would tell you is that we have a lot of on-premise solutions. We see them. Um, and then they have internal translation teams, and they need to be trained on those on-premise solutions. So actually, it's something which is an opportunity, to be honest with you, because you get inside of that organization, you train that organization, you have to leave them do what they're going to do, but essentially you build up much more of a relationship. So it's definitely something that happens. It's actually an opportunity to perhaps be more consultative. And as we move into the AI paradigm, perhaps the language industry is going to have to be more
Yeah,
consultative. And that's something which, building up that reputation is key, especially around deployments.
yeah, that's right. Now, in your job in your profession right now, my understanding is you consult on these things, you provide your expertise to the industry and outside the industry to users of our industry, etc. So, what is your thoughts and to if somebody was asking you as a part of your consulting work around creating new offerings. So now I know what I need to know about AI. I know what I need to know about my customers, and I know where this world is heading in the future. I need to reinvent my the way I do business as a business owner in the localization industries in the industry. So what is your you would say your advice to somebody who is trying to create new offering in their business?
Absolutely. I think one of the key things about new offerings is that you'll see that having a brainstorm internally and trying to repurpose, the skill sets you've got is one of those fundamental things. That's why this open discourse within organization is so powerful. If you look at leadership, perhaps some of the solutions won't come from leadership, perhaps they'll come from other places in the organization. There are folks that are much more digitally native, people that are more AI native, and I think it's incumbent to take on that discourse. When it comes to creating offerings, one of the key things is to come up with a list and then to start to pilot. One of the things is that working out really what your capabilities are and working out maybe, if there are gaps in your skill sets or gaps in your technology, and how to kind of, fill those gaps is important. Perhaps, talk to some of the key customers that you have, look at, for instance, their needs, align to their roadmap, and say, actually, we have something here that perhaps we can run together as a pilot and build up that confidence. But it has to be obviously with a customer that's willing to put in the time and the commitment to a pilot, and then sit together, work out what the results mean, and then potentially go from there. But essentially, I think would say you have to really pilot some of your capabilities. There's going to be some probably outlandish ideas about what you can do, and those might not necessarily be very practical, but there might be some practical things that you can probably accomplish low-hanging fruit within the first few months to talk to a customer and get the feedback on it.
So, Rodrigo, do you recommend having this within the core company that you already have as a business owner, or do you recommend having it as a division sitting aside a little bit? And there is pros and cons to everything, I guess, in this case. I'm just trying to picture it. Do I use the existing infrastructure, or do I create something new on the side that's got new perspective and new ideas, a new future outlook to how things should be done? What's your recommendation?
My recommendation is a little bit, I guess, biased in terms of how I've worked in the past. Probably part of a small agile group that's slightly a nexus to the main organization. I think that helps to have some level of agility and be able to go to the rest of the organization and feed off some of the ideas, but have at least a core group that are completely dedicated to the idea of AI offerings. This has to be developed in tandem because the organization is still predicated on being operational and delivering what it has day to day. So unless you have perhaps maybe a specialized group that can actually build the solutions and take them forward, you're probably, you're going to be distracted. So I would opt always to have a specialist group on the side, tasked with coming up with solutions, piloting solutions, and then looking how to monetize them. But I think it needs, at least at the beginning, a specialized group of very dedicated and committed individuals.
I've seen it before, and it's not a far-fetched to think that some customers, if they believe in the solution or they need something so badly to be implemented because their business depends on it, I've seen it before where the customer invests in an idea and they become your partner to take that idea to the next level. Have you seen that?
I haven't seen that necessarily, but I can see why that would work. I think that we are in a position in the localization industry to be attached to this large language model paradigm, and our talents and what we've achieved thus far might make us seem very capable to some organizations that say, actually, we have this great relationship with this LSP. They've managed to help us on a plethora of different challenges. You can see how much technology they've got. They're understanding. They're very approachable. Why not? I mean, I think that it's a conversation that LSPs need to take to their clients and say, we can do a lot more. Test us.
Yeah, that's right. Now, one of the things is, I keep hearing, like, in your conversation today with me, and I appreciate you being with me on this podcast. I'm really enjoying this conversation. I have so many questions I want to throw at you, but I know they sometimes, like, my questions come in within a domain, and sometimes they move a little bit around. But I'm trying to get to a point. So I hear you talk a lot about IT. I hear my previous guests on this channel, they talk a lot about IT. Are we at a point where we are we're closely merging into an IT industry versus being a localization? I know we're all part of a knowledge-based economy, but are we moving toward being an IT industry with a flavor with a specialty in the language industry?
I've not heard that question before, to be honest with you. I can see why that might come about. because of the element of so much technology that we've had and deployment. Um, I wonder whether whether that's what we want to do. I mean, the one thing is being capable of doing something, and the other is perhaps having the leadership to follow through on that idea. Um, Wherever we end up, I think we've got to think about the talent that we've got at our disposal.
Yeah.
What makes you think that perhaps the IT would work well? I mean, you've been involved so many LSPs, but what kind of virtues do you
So where
think?
I'm going with this is because the consumer the dynamics and how they buy things is changing. So the consumer and the customer that we used to know how they buy and the way they behave when they buy localization services 10, 15 years ago, even 5 years ago, is different than it is today. So back a few years ago, we used to have a lot of touch points with our customer, face-to-face interactions, etc. If you look at the buying dynamics from customers right now, they don't want to talk to anybody mostly. I mean, I'm sure there are exceptions, and the 80-20 rule applies everywhere in the world. So I'm sure there's exceptions. However, the new generation that they're coming to the business, not our business, any business, they're bringing, their tradition of working, tradition of how they behave with them, and they're becoming our customers. So they're becoming our customer in a way they want low touch points. I want to do everything via apps. I want to buy things without even addressing anybody. Just put it somewhere where I can see it online, and I'll do my transaction hands off kind of thing. And that behavioral changes combined with what we're talking about from a technology shift, I think it's going to require, because the integration that we talk about, large language model, AI, TMs, etc., it's going to require a lot of IT effort to bring it
Mm.
together. They can't sit in containers in isolations. They have to take advantage of all. We have to take advantage of all the resources, the IT resources. So the investment in the development and research and development for each company, they're going to put together to make sense of it all and to create new offering and to build these building blocks from an IT perspective. It's putting a lot more resources into IT now versus, of course, you're not going to get rid of the current resources that you have in the linguistic point of view. You're going to make use of them in validating what I'm building from an IT perspective. That was my thought when I asked you the question.
Got it. It makes sense. And I'll tell you why it makes sense to me. Because actually I live in Valencia. So Valencia is very much looking towards have a huge amount of startup culture and startup hubs here in Valencia. And having been to, I guess, the fairs and the conferences here in Valencia and met with a lot of startups, you can see exactly what you're saying about low touch points, much more fluid. And I think that that type of customer is probably, the next generation, a generation after, and a generation after. And so, they will see, large language models as part of their roadmap and potentially, lower touch points. And for them, that might be the much more fluid way into interact. And I think that brings us kind of to another area of localization challenges, really, or opportunities, depends, how you look at it. The customers that we have today are not going to be the same as the customers we have tomorrow. And I think if we align ourselves as an industry to innovation in startups and scale ups, we're probably going to make a lot more headway, but it's going to mean a lot of changes, just like the one that you kind of signaled there.
So one of the things like I've seen in other industries, and you brought up a little bit, this whole discourse in terms of how we talk to each other as an industry leaders to enhance or to find ways to solve some of these challenges that's facing us as an industry. One thing is I feel like the problem is not unique. The challenge is not unique. It's every company is going to go through this. Make sense of AI, combine it with your large language model, and figure out how to marry all this together with your transition memories. But I feel like everybody is working in isolation on something different specific to them. I get it. Every customer is specific, every company is specific. But on the face of it, from an architectural point of view, there are some commonalities that as an industry, instead of having 19,000 companies in our industry trying to figure out, each one of them trying to figure out on their own, of course, there are the technology providers that are trying to figure out for us as well. Wondering how do we encourage, cooperation? How do we encourage, because it feels like to me we live in a competitive world. Nobody wants to talk to anybody. Everybody's afraid of everybody. I don't get it. I don't understand it. But here you go. We are where we are, where we are. Why don't we just like a poker player, right? So show your cards. Let's solve this problem together. and it'd be beneficial for all of us. Am I thinking too naively here, or
Well, perhaps not naively, but I mean, some of this is happening already in terms of, deliberate actions, mergers and acquisitions. So we're seeing a
yep,
number of mergers and acquisitions, and I think there's a couple of things behind that. One is that, there hasn't been a huge amount of growth necessary for the industry because of a few difficult years. So mergers and acquisitions is a way in which, you can kind of resolve some of the lack of revenue and combine forces. Some have been more strategic than others. Some are really predicated on finding more, I guess, technology. And when you see these mergers between technology companies and LSPs, it's interesting to see who comes out in terms of the leadership. Sometimes even if let's say the LSP is the greater part of it, actually the leadership is going to come from the new CEO, will be part of the smaller company that was technology driven. So some of what you're saying, it just happens because people have to aggregate their talents. And some of the other things if you look at, for instance, the agenda of a number, like if we go back in time, we look at the agenda of Lockworld or Gala or some of the big places, last 5-6 years, they're starting to change. If there was, a predominance of one area, now, none of them are not going to be talking about AI, and people come to share in those areas. And again, like I was saying earlier about partnerships that the LSPs will have to, I guess, foster with institutions, translation institutions, with universities. So I think there are multiple players. It may not be that the LSPs want to necessarily work together, and there's probably barriers for that. But there are other players in which you can partner, and it's very valuable to do so.
yeah, absolutely. Now, before I want to make sure that I leave enough room in this conversation, because this conversation is so interesting, and you're such an interesting individual. I really love talking to you, Rodrigo. Um, so tell the audience about what you do and how can they get in touch with you? How can they use their expertise? Because you're one of those individuals, like we want to put you up on a pedestal a little bit to make sure that everybody knows about you, everybody finds out about you, everybody uses your skills to improve their businesses.
Yeah, well, I mean, my journey in the last 6 months has been interesting. So, I parted company with an organization after 20 years. There was a period where, I needed to kind of like take stock.
Yep.
And, some of it's to do with age as well. I passed 50 last year, and that to me,
Still young, man. What are you talking about?
to me at the time it felt like a little bit like there was a pre-crisis, and then it really wasn't as bad as I thought. There was nothing to worry about. Actually, there's a huge amount of relief. And so I took stock for a while, and with some friends and that are involved in the industry, and some from outside the industry, I put together my LinkedIn profile. I started to write. I started to put down my thoughts, and started to kind of figure out, okay, how can I be useful? So, I think that's the thing. A lot of it is to do with mentoring as well. In the last part of what I was working on, there was a lot of mentoring that I was enjoying. And so, for now, what I'm doing is I'm working with companies. There's a variety of companies. A lot of it is really predicated on transformation. Some are LSPs, some are not LSPs, some are much in other areas really to do with, perhaps, the technology, for instance. And I go in there and I audit what they're doing, and really what they want to do is really in part change their sales playbook. So one of the things I've been doing is writing sales playbooks for organizations which have an AI frame.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I've actually started to work, which is great, and I'm enjoying it. It was challenging because you're going into an organization that you don't know, and you have to get to know people very, very quickly, and you have to kind of, talk to them. And I think for me, the challenge was, try not to be too inquisitive at the point where I feel like I'm grilling somebody, but, try to make it like a conversation. They're meeting me for the first time. But after a week or so, the barriers come down, the tension comes down, people, realize that you're there to help. And then you've got to be accountable. The interesting thing about being self-employed as a consultant is that, you're measured by pretty much, what you're able to give back and how quickly you're able to give back. So I think in large organizations, sometimes there are layers of bureaucracy. I'm asked to come in, asked to do things quickly, and I'm given a mandate to do that. And that's actually very satisfying. So that's what I'm doing at the moment, kind of, and especially around the area of AI deployments, where, looking at the processes, looking at the technology, looking at the people, and then figuring out where's the next step, where's that offering that's going to make us more, competitive, unique. And I'm enjoying it. I mean, I'm getting to speak to people, on a daily basis, and learning huge amounts. So it's very pleasurable. And like I've had some articles published, which I was very grateful for. And everything gets thrown onto LinkedIn, which is another thing, which is social media. LinkedIn is a social media platform. You've got to do your self promotion, as it were, talking to people such as yourself, Robin. All of this didn't necessarily come natural to me when I first started this about a year and a half ago, when I first started to say I'm going to have to get onto social media. At that point, I needed to go to an expert. The expert I went to was a 15-year-old. She was my daughter, and she she explained some of the things I'd need to do, and helped me along the way. And I'm very grateful for her expertise and especially her patience.
Oh, what a wonderful story! Thank you. I appreciate you sharing this. That's great. Before we adjourn, is there anything else that you think it's important for the audience to know before we wrap it up?
No, I mean, I think to me, I think the transformation that's going to take place needs a lot of leadership. It's not going to be
Yeah.
a pyramid leadership. I think, leaders have to be very self-reflective. They need to figure out, what talents they have and what their contribution will be, and they need to find the talents and contributions throughout their organization. I think that we need to kind of recognize that there might be a number of approaches. You have to put into place, pilots. You're going to have to be brave. You have to approach your customers. And I think in that sense, that you're looking towards just creating a new culture within your organization. And I think the good thing is that, like, we're seeing a generation coming into the workforce that are much more digitally native, much more AI native. And it'd be interesting to see, how we harness sometimes young people come into the organization or into industry and they're given only a certain amount of responsibility. Actually, it's quite interesting, and I know my story is a silly one, but I had to look down and look around and figure out, okay, where am I going to get this advice from? And it comes from probably the most obvious place, the younger generation.
That's right. So I want to thank you, Rodrigo, for joining me today. I really appreciate it. I really thoroughly enjoyed this conversation.
Me too. Thank you.
I wish you come back again
and
absolutely. Do another podcast in another time, maybe on another topic, etc. Whatever you have in mind. Always good to talk to you.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for being part of the call today, part of the conversation. To our audience, I want to thank you for listening in. Thank you for being part of this podcast today with Rodrigo Corradi. Rodrigo, again, thanks a lot. Any last comments before I stop the recording?
No, just really for all those that are perhaps coming to Gala in Valencia, feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to meet you. Enjoy the event if you're here, and yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much, Rodrigo. Thanks everybody for listening in. And if you're not a subscriber, please consider subscribing to our channel. We'd love to see you as a subscriber. That way you can get all of our updates. And we record these things. I record these things on these podcasts on a weekly basis. So it's always a new, fresh perspective, fresh conversation. And it's all about keeping the dialogue going in our industry. So thank you so much, everybody, for listening in. Thank you for our guest, Rodrigo, for being part of this conversation. Enjoy Valencia, Rodrigo, and enjoy the weekend. Thank you.
Brilliant. Likewise.